Welcome to the Best Little Town podcast, your go-to source for everything happening in the town of Bedford's local government. Whether it's new initiatives or important decisions shaping our town's future, you'll hear it right here. This podcast is dedicated to keeping our residents informed and engaged.
Hello and welcome to the Best Little Town podcast. My name is Bart Warner. I'm the town manager of the town of Bedford, and joining you on Wednesday morning, June 3rd, to provide a report and recap of the most recent town council meeting, which took place last night on Thursday, June 2nd. To begin with, there were a couple of council members who were not physically present. Councilman Dwight Evans was out of town due to a family medical situation. Vice Mayor Darrell Updike, who's also a member of council, was also out of town due to family obligations, but they had requested to participate by remote means, and we appreciate Media Squatch for facilitating that for us through our contractual relationship. The first item of business before the meeting kind of got into the agenda was approval of the remote attendance of both those members. That was voted on separately. First was Vice Mayor Updike's request. Councilman Stacy Haley made a motion, seconded by Todd Foreman, to allow that participation. That was approved unanimously by the other members present. Next was vote on Councilman Dwight Evans' request to participate remotely, and that was also moved to be approved by Councilman Haley, seconded by Councilman Foreman, and unanimously approved. With that action taken care of, we then got into the business of the agenda as published. The first item was the approval of the minutes from, I believe it was May 19th was our previous meeting. And of course, those were unanimously approved. Next was my report, the report of the town manager. Basically, I mentioned that there are many events commemorating the anniversary of D-Day beginning on Thursday of this week within the community. The Bauer Center is the site of an exhibit featuring the works of Charles Schulz. And I think that exhibit opens Thursday afternoon. Friday evening will include a light and sound presentation entitled When We Went In. That will be presented at the National D-Day Memorial around dusk. That is an event that requires tickets for admission, so if you're interested in that, we would ask that you reach out to the D-Day Memorial Foundation staff to see how you can gain admission. The annual Remembrance Ceremony, sponsored by the National D-Day Memorial Foundation, will take place on site at the memorial on Saturday at 11 o'clock a.m. Also, the Bedford Boys Tribute Center will host a wreath-laying ceremony in front of the Bedford County Courthouse on Saturday evening beginning at 5:45 p.m. The next item on the agenda was appearances before council. We had one person sign up to speak, and that was Mr. Irving Reynolds, who identified himself as the pastor of Bethel Baptist Church in Evington. He shared a word of scripture with us from Jeremiah chapter 33, specifically beginning with verse 3, and also offered prayer on behalf of the community and the council. The next item was council comments. We began around the dais with Councilman David Foster, who thanked all those who were physically in attendance. And he also asked for me to provide an update on the status of the Bedford Middle School renovation project, and specifically the activity ongoing with the yellow building. That's the older of the two main buildings on that site, affectionately referred to as Old Yellow. The performance agreement for the redevelopment of that property calls for that to be a boutique hotel. The apartment building next door has been complete and is now up and running. And as an aside, I noted that is now being leased. It's almost 3/4 full in terms of the leased units available there. So that part of the project is substantially complete by Waukesha Development and their principal, Dave McCormick. I also noted that I spoke with Mr. McCormick by phone last week to talk about the status of Old Yellow. Last night I mentioned the fact that there was a delay in that part of the project related to a dispute and some questions about the construction drawings that were submitted to our building official. Our building official actually issued a stop work order around January until those issues were resolved. And as developers tend to do, Mr. McCormick shifted his crews that were here onto other active projects. So that issue with the drawings and the building permit has been resolved, but Mr. McCormick is still in the process of getting his workers back from the other projects elsewhere in Virginia. And he advised me last week that that's still probably going to take a couple of weeks. He affirmed that the Old Yellow Building will still be developed as a hotel. One unique feature is that the rooms will include washers and dryers. And Dave explained that that is on the advice of his consultants who advise him about the hotel business, that essentially he will be competing with every other hotel in the area, including the Hampton Inn, which is currently coming out of the ground up on Burke's Hill. So he shared with me the insight that rather than compete on the same model that Hampton Inn does, he has to find a niche that makes sense to allow him to be competitive. And the offering of washers and dryers is one unique thing that his hotel will apparently have. I noted that there'd been a little bit of conversation among citizens in town about that, and those were the answers we have. Next to speak was Councilman Stacey Haley, who also expressed his appreciation for the people who were physically present and in attendance. He specifically noted the presence of John Barnhart of the Bedford Bulletin, and John had some health issues, which he recounted in his column last week in the Bedford Bulletin, and had missed a few of our meetings, and Stacy shared his views that it was just good to see him back among the living and among those present in the council chambers last night. Mr. Haley also noted that the Benevolent and Protective Order of Elks will be sponsoring a Flag Day event on Wednesday, June 10th at 9 o'clock a.m. in Centertown Plaza. Next to speak was Councilman Todd Foreman, who likewise expressed his appreciation for everyone who was physically in attendance. He noted that he had visited the Bedford Police Department last week and specifically met with the accreditation manager and reviewed some of the activities there related to our CALIA accreditation and reaccreditation activities, and shared his view that there was some good work being performed by Chris Ficchetti, who is our accreditation manager, and also Chief Jim Moore, in meeting the criteria, which are rather stringent for that accreditation. Todd Foreman also began his comments by recognizing policemen who were injured and murdered recently. Specifically, Todd's reference, I think, was to unfortunate situations in Carroll County and Chesterfield County, which resulted in deaths of our law enforcement officials. And we certainly ask that you would keep those families and our neighbors in your thoughts and prayers. Next to speak was Councilman Jay Ippolito. He discussed details of his attendance of the Memorial Day commemoration at the National D-Day Memorial during the previous week, and his interactions with the members of the Mothers Against Veteran Suicide group. He noted that the leaders of that group had come to Bedford earlier in the week prior to Memorial Day weekend itself and spent some time in Bedford, and shared with Jay the fact that they typically take a few trips around the country. They go to different places, but they were so impressed with the welcome they received in Bedford that they are going to include the trip here as part of their annual itinerary. So appreciate everyone who worked to make them feel welcome. Jay noted a few people. I think Doug and Denise Berry were mentioned, and Leslie Mahaffey specifically. He also noted he introduced me to the members of that group up at D-Day, which I certainly appreciate. Final person to speak last night during council comments was Mayor C.G. Stanley. He also noted that he shared his view that it was good to have John Barnhart back in the audience again. And John's involvement in the community goes way back, and C.G. shared an anecdote of looking at some old papers from the 1980s and noting John's presence as a writer even back then. CG expressed his personal appreciation for what John does both professionally and for the community. Mayor Stanley also noted his participation in a Building Opportunity on Main Street, or BOOMS, project that took place last week. That included some consultants funded by the Virginia Department of Housing and Community Development who came in to seek some input and obtain some data about what is possible in the downtown areas. That also included a walkthrough that took place last Wednesday, May 27th, and they presented their findings on Thursday morning, May 28th, with some good data and recommendations that were gained from their visit. Mayor Stanley also noted that the D-Day annual remembrance ceremony is set for Saturday at 11 o'clock a.m., which in his view honors exactly what Bedford is certainly well known for, and he encouraged people to participate. There were no council committees which have met since the last time we had a regular council meeting, and there were no revisions to the agenda. So with that, we jumped right into the rest of the agenda. The first was a public hearing on the business, professional, and occupational licensing tax for calendar year 2027. This tax, the BPOL tax, is proposed to be increased from 15 cents per $100 of gross receipts for retailers who have sales in excess of $10 million. Currently, the rate has been 15 cents per $100. The budget as proposed would raise that to 20 cents per $100. Public hearing notice was read and the hearing itself was open. There were no speakers, and so consequently we moved on to the next item of the agenda, which is new business. And the first feature in that part of the agenda was a brief presentation regarding the operations and outcomes of the Finance Department, which was presented by Ann Cantrell, who serves very capably as our Director of Finance. Ann provided a great deal of information about the daily activities and responsibilities of her department. I would encourage folks who were not there present physically during the real-time presentation or who didn't watch last night to go on youtube.com, search for Town of Bedford, Virginia, and watch last night's meeting to get further details about the difficult and challenging work that the good folks in the Finance Department and Treasurer's Office perform. The next item of new business was the ordinance that would effectively raise the BPOL tax for retailers who have sales in excess of $10 million from 15 cents per $100 to 20 cents per $100. Town Council was requested to adopt the ordinance that would affect that change, and on a motion by Councilman Dave Foster, seconded by Councilman Stacy Haley, the vote was unanimous, all 7 members voting to make that change in the BPOL tax rate for calendar year 2027. The next item of new business was adoption of the budget for fiscal year 2026-2027. The fiscal year 2026 proposed budget was presented to Town Council at a work session on May 2nd. After input from the work session, the budget was revised to reflect recommendations of Town Council. A notice of public hearing was advertised in the Bedford Bulletin on May 6th, and that public hearing took place on May 19th at the regular council meeting. Fiscal year 26-27 budget summary is included as follows. The general fund is proposed to be $11.3 million. The solid waste fund is over $729,000. The electric fund is proposed to be $30.2 million. The fund for the Public Safety Training Center, that is a joint operation of the town and county, which provides opportunities for basically police and fire and other first responders to maintain their skills. That budget is proposed to be just over $82,000. There is a $10,000 restricted fund included in the budget. The general fund capital project budget is proposed to be $260,000, and the electric fund capital budget is proposed to be $2.1 million. The total of all funds for the proposed 26-27 budget cycle is $44,813,561. Last night, Town Council was requested to adopt the budget for fiscal year 26-27 and approve the ordinance appropriating the funds. Before that motion was made and discussion took place, I did interject a note, one change recently in terms of the personnel listing. which relates to the information technology department. We've had a position identified as network technician that is currently vacant at grade 16. We've got a vacancy in that, and based on our review of the actual workload and what needs to take place according to Daryl Fouts, our IT director, we are creating a new position which is identified as help desk technician at grade 14. So both of these will be included in the allocation that is part of the budget, but our intent is to keep the network technician position vacant at grade 16 and instead replace that individual with a help desk technician at grade 14, which essentially would be a lower cost. Conversation then ensued among council members. Councilman Stacey Haley brought up a garbage truck that was included in the original capital improvement plan and proposal for fiscal year 26-27 and questioned whether it would be wise to defer that to fiscal year 27-28 and also have another discussion of trash pickup and that service in general during the coming fiscal year. Councilman Haley also noted that the electric department is proposing to purchase an electric utility truck that will cost at least $425,000, suggested that we possibly divide the payments for that truck over multiple years based on our prior experience, which says that when we do order a vehicle such as this or a piece of equipment, it typically takes longer than 12 months to receive. So in an effort to kind of reduce the encumbrance and the effect on the budget, Councilman Haley asked about the possibility of splitting that over the next 2 fiscal years. Electric Director John Wagner rose to the podium and advised that while typically it does take about 18 months to receive those trucks from the time they are ordered, it is very possible that we may actually get it within the next fiscal year. And this is a truck that will be replacing one that has been in use for 12 years. So he shared his view that it's a truck that's very much needed, and we will need to pay for it regardless of when it does arrive. Councilman Haley also asked a question about the activities of some contractors in town, mainly PCC, and citizens may have seen trucks bearing that logo. That is a firm that has been engaged by a lot of the telecommunications providers and internet service providers in town who've been expanding. Mr. Wagner explained that we have an arrangement with those people whereby they provide some backup services for us in the event that we ever need them. He noted that basically our payment to them is the travel expenses that they incur in addition to their existing contracts with their other telecom providers. The recent example we had a couple of weeks ago on South Street, where an electric pole was hit, that was actually replaced by PCC, mainly because our lineman crews were already performing some scheduled work in other places, and they could not be pulled away to address that in a timely fashion. Those of you in the downtown area who may have been affected by that are aware that that pole essentially took out power to a significant portion of the southern part of Main Street from Odie Street to Crenshaw Street. We were able to restore that within about 8 hours, I think, mainly because PCC was able to do that for us. Otherwise, we would have had to reroute our electric crews, stop a project that had been underway up on Colton Mill substation outside the town, and that probably would have made that outage last a little bit longer. Mr. Wagner also noted that the use of contractors makes it a little bit easier, in his opinion, to recover those costs from insurance. I'm going to wait for the train to pass by before I continue speaking here. Feel free to think in your mind of your favorite Johnny Cash lyrics as it goes by. Going back to when things happen, when town property is damaged, we are represented by the Virginia Risk Sharing Association. That's our insurance coverage provider, basically provided through our membership of the Virginia Municipal League. Whenever things like this happen, where the pole is hit, we do turn those claims into the insurance company, and they do pursue collection on our behalf. So John explained that in answer to Mr. Haley's question. Next, Councilman Jay Ippolito raised some concerns about enforcement of parking standards and shared his concerns about the level of activity and level of service provided for our police department, and trying to not editorialize too much. Mr. Ippolito essentially shared his dissatisfaction with the current level of service and asked if there were additional staff included in the budget as proposed. We responded that we have not added additional personnel because largely there's not revenue identified to pay for that, and that the intention of the police department is to enforce the existing parking regulations with the existing allocated staff. On that note, we mentioned that we're currently down in our numbers a bit, but we have 3 officers who have recently completed the academy and will be sworn in. And coincidentally, we intend to introduce those at the next council meeting on June 16th, which hopefully could address some of the concerns raised by Mr. Ippolito. Mr. Ippolito suggested that we consider a new position for enforcement and shared his view that the revenues collected by that enforcement could pay for that position. There were a couple of other random comments about the budget, but then ultimately there was a motion made by Councilman Dave Foster, seconded by Vice Mayor Updike, to adopt the budget for fiscal year 26-27 and approve the ordinance appropriating funds. That motion passed by a vote of 5-2. Voting yes were Councilman Dwight Evans, Councilman Todd Foreman, Councilman Dave Foster, Vice Mayor Darrell Updike, and Mayor C.G. Stanley. Voting against the budget adoption were Councilman Stacy Haley and Councilman Jay Ippolito. Final item of new business was issuance of a request for proposals for conservation easement advisory services. The town of Bedford owns several properties that are being reviewed by town council for several potential purposes, including the possible applicability of available conservation programs. In order to identify and maximize the benefits of such programs, staff has drafted a request for proposals designed to obtain expert assistance and advisement services. A draft of the proposed RFP was presented for council's review. Qualified responses would then be evaluated by staff and reported back to council for formal consideration at a later public hearing. And last night, staff was asking council to approve the publication of that RFP. As part of the discussion, Councilman Haley asked about what specific properties would be included in the services to be provided. The answer is we don't really know yet, but I did explain that we have been approached by a provider of this kind of services, mainly in response to our recent discussions of the property adjacent to the Stony Creek Reservoir. As I reported last night, and I'll mention candidly on this podcast, that was an individual who indicated that there might be some benefit to the town pursuing a conservation easement on the properties it owns there, but it got to the point where they were trying to engage specifically in a contract, and I had to discontinue that discussion because, in my view, we need to procure those kind of services appropriately, and instead of entering unilaterally into that kind of agreement, we wanted to make sure council was aware of the discussion and also the public. And then also we put out the RFP to see if there are other qualified entities who can provide that guidance to us. So that's kind of the background. It kind of came out of the reservoir discussion. That could be an outcome, but the first step would be to obtain the services of a qualified expert who can guide us through that. That is a very specialized and complicated process. It involves remuneration of tax credits, certain questions about deed restrictions and ownership, that there are people who specialize in this, and our intention would be to secure the services of someone who would do that on either a contingency or commission basis, and there would not be any cost to the town. But the first step is to identify an appropriate source of those services. So that was the intent behind the issuance of the RFP. On a motion by Todd Foreman, seconded by Councilman Stacy Haley, council voted unanimously to approve publication of a request for proposals for conservation easement advisory services. And with that, the business of the town was concluded at last night's town council meeting. The next meeting will take place on Tuesday, June 16th, beginning at 7 p.m. Again, we are scheduled to meet on the first and third Tuesdays of each month at 7 p.m. at 215 East Main Street in our council chambers. That's located on the upstairs top floor of the building. In the meantime, if you have any questions about things or any concerns, we certainly welcome your input at any time. Please call Town Hall during business hours at 540-587-6001, or you can email me directly at bwarner, that's BWARNER, at bedfordva.gov, and I will be happy to assist you with any questions, concerns, or hopefully not, any problems you have. In the meantime, we appreciate your attention to things. I've always said we will always take interest over apathy anytime. So we have a lot of folks who are expressing interest in the activities of town, a lot of people who are actively investing in the town and conducting business, and we appreciate all of that. And we appreciate the patience of everyone as we experiencing some new things within town, including some physical growth in terms of residential housing, some possible redevelopment in our downtown areas, and always ideas about what things should look like in the future. And again, the title of this podcast, Best Little Town, is always our goal and our intent to meet high standards for our community. So we appreciate everyone who makes that possible and does that in a variety of ways. Hope you will be able to join us at the meeting on June 16th, and good Lord willing, I will be back on June 17th to provide a recap. Until then, thank you very much for your attention and wish you all the best in your experience living, working, and playing in Bedford, Virginia, the world's best little town.